James Dalton, a fresh college graduate, had just moved into a small, modest house in a quiet suburb of Ohio. He was searching for a job, applying to countless positions every day. In the meantime, he had nothing to do but spend his nights watching movies to kill time. His sleep schedule was erratic, as he often stayed up late binge-watching horror films, his favorite genre. He was captivated by the unknown, the chilling, and the thrill of not knowing what would come next in a film. Little did he know, his fascination with the dark and the eerie was about to become his worst nightmare. It started innocuously enough. James, a rational and logical young man, thought little of the jump scares and eerie sounds that often filled his room late at night. He would watch films until his eyes were heavy with exhaustion, then drift off into a restless sleep. But as the nights wore on, he began to feel something shift. It was subtle at first, a sense of unease when he woke up, as though something was different. Still, he pushed it aside. After all, horror films had a way of playing tricks on your mind. One night, after finishing a particularly terrifying movie, he lay down to sleep with the faint sound of a creaking floorboard echoing in his mind. Just as he was drifting off, something sharp and sudden broke the stillness of the night, a loud, ringing slap across his face. It wasn't a dream. It was real. James jolted awake, heart racing. His face burned with pain, the sensation of the slap still vivid in his mind. He reached up, half expecting to feel the mark of someone's hand. There was nothing, only the lingering warmth of sleep and confusion. He lay back down, dismissing it as a product of his overactive imagination. I've been watching too many horror movies, he thought. But deep down, he knew something felt off. The next morning, everything changed. James received an interview call for a position he'd applied to weeks ago. Elated, he rushed to the bathroom to prepare. As he stared into the mirror, his excitement quickly turned to dread. On his right cheek, vivid and unmistakable, was a red mark, 4 distinct finger-shaped bruises. His heart pounded in his chest. The slap from the night before was real. It hadn't been a dream. It had been something. Someone. Panic gripped him, but he had no choice. He couldn't cancel the interview. He couldn't show up like this, but the mark was too visible. Still, he grabbed his jacket, hoped that makeup could cover it, and headed to the company office. The interview started off awkwardly. The interviewer, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-30s, paused as soon as she saw him, her brow furrowing. "James, what happened to your face?" she asked. James tried to explain, laughing nervously, but his story only made her stare harder, as if she knew something he didn't. As the interview continued, he couldn't help but feel more and more uncomfortable. His anxiety intensified as he noticed the other people in the office glancing at his face, whispering among themselves, and then looking at him as if they'd seen a ghost. One by one, colleagues passing by couldn't hold back their curiosity. "Who slapped you?" one asked bluntly. Another muttered, "Looks like a handprint." James, now completely rattled, left the office as quickly as possible, his mind spiraling. What the hell is happening to me? That night, unable to sleep, James did what he always did when his mind was racing. He watched another horror film. This one was a supernatural thriller, the kind that delved deep into spirits and entities that could enter our world. As the film played on, he felt an odd chill, more so than usual. It wasn't just the atmosphere of the movie. It felt like something else was in the room with him. The slap from the night before kept replaying in his mind, as if it were burned into his skin. He shut his eyes, trying to block it out. But when he opened them, everything had changed. The room seemed darker, the shadows deeper. His TV flickered, and the air turned cold. Then, through the dim light of the screen, he saw a figure standing in the corner of his room. A tall, gaunt figure, its face obscured by the shadows. A feeling of dread settled over him, the air thick with an oppressive, suffocating presence. His heart raced, but he couldn't move. Frozen in place as the figure seemed to step closer, the faintest sound of footsteps echoing in the room. "Who "Are you?" James whispered, barely able to breathe. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it raised a hand, its fingers long, twisted, and unnaturally thin. James tried to scream, but the words caught in his throat as the figure slapped him hard across the face. The same spot, the same burning sensation. His head spun. He stumbled backward, falling to the floor, heart pounding, chest heaving. When he looked up, the figure was gone. His room was back to normal. But his face, the mark was there again. The red, bruised outline of fingers, still fresh and raw. He could hardly breathe. The next few days were a blur of terror. Each night, James could feel the presence grow stronger. It followed him. He felt watched, and his sleep was filled with nightmares of ghostly figures and eerie whispers. The haunting was relentless. No matter how many times he wiped the mark from his face or tried to move on, the entity always returned. It slapped him. It tormented him. It didn't want him to escape. It was then that James realized the horrifying truth. By watching those films, by indulging in the dark and supernatural, he had invited something into his life. The entity that now tormented him wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It was real, and it was angry. In his desperation, James sought help from a paranormal investigator, hoping that someone could rid him of the entity. The investigator performed rituals, tried to cleanse the house, but the figure only grew stronger, more violent. The slap marks on James's face became more frequent, and his sanity began to crumble. One night, the investigator found something unsettling: a hidden room in the basement. It was covered in old, rotting books, many with pages burned or torn. In the center was an altar, blood-stained and old. The investigator's eyes widened as he realized the truth. The entity was tied to the house. It wasn't just a spirit, it was a curse, one that had been feeding on the fear of every soul who dared to live there. And James, with his obsession with horror and the supernatural, had unknowingly fed it. In a final attempt to save himself, James tried to leave the house. But the moment he stepped out the door, he felt a cold hand grip his shoulder. Whipping around, he saw no one, but the slap was there, burning across his face. He fell to the ground, choking on his own breath. James never left that house. The house remained empty for years until one day, a new tenant moved in. That night, the TV flickered to life on its own, and the sound of a loud slap echoed through the house. A new chapter in the haunting had begun, and it would never end.